Stay in your lane. Welcome to the Mind Your Own podcast with Aaron Sorensen and Sausha Durkin, where we stick to sports, except when we're not.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mind Your Own podcast. I'm Erin.
I'm Sausha.
And this is a special episode. It's the first episode of a new month. And I had kind of kicked this idea around in very last minute, told Sausha, as in a couple weeks ago, I was have this idea. As most things with the Mind Your Own podcast, we're flying by the seat of our pants. And I said we should have a guest on the show for the first episode of each month, because some of you have asked, could we get a guest? And I mean, aside from being slightly offended that you just don't want to hear Sausha and I talk all the time, just ourselves, I agree. It's good to have outside perspective. So we are making that happen. And I'm excited. Thank you, Sausha, for always going along with my ideas.
Absolutely.
And we are not by ourselves. We are joined by Drake Keeler, who I am so excited to have on the podcast. He is a student at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He is with the Daily Nebraskan. Drake, hello. I want you to tell me about yourself. But first, how are you?
Doing good. Hi. I am, of course, a junior at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm a journalism major with a minor in African American Studies. Currently at the Daily Nebraskan, I'm the senior sports editor, and I am also the Diversity Inclusion Board internal chair. I started the board last fall, so that is what I'm doing. I was born in Omaha, grew up in Colorado though, and now I'm back here.
No, that's awesome. Where in Colorado did you grow up?
Parker, Colorado. It's south of Denver. Less than an hour, a little less.
Nice. And so what brought you back to Nebraska? I guess, being born in Nebraska gives you some ties, but what brought you back to the University of Nebraska?
Yeah, I mean, my whole family, my sister went to Nebraska a few years ago. My parents went to Nebraska. I still have family in Nebraska. So I've always been around here, even though I haven't lived here since I can't even remember what it was like. But, I've always been out here, and I visited and I felt like coming back.
I am so glad that you are in Nebraska, for full transparency. And I say that because for anyone who isn't familiar with Drake and his work, I really recommend you can find him on Twitter at Drake Keeler. Obviously, you can read all of his work in the Daily Nebraskan as well, but he is a good follow on Twitter. So that is at Drake Keeler. And this sort of lends itself to why we wanted to have you on the podcast, because I think what you're doing at Nebraska is so important, so cool, and definitely something that is needed. You mentioned that you are the chair of the Diversity Inclusion Board for the DN, but it feels like I'm just jumping right into this, but I am really curious. How can you just walk us through how this came to be? I read your story that you started with the project that you've been working on, that this wasn't something that you did because you had to, you wanted to, but you did note there isn't a lot of diversity with the DN right now. So walk us through how this began, how you fell into the role.
Yeah. So, first I'll say, first I'll say I'm the only Black senior staff member at the Daily Nebraskan right now. When we were planning for our fall magazine, we had been picking out a topic, and we were probably going to do it online anyways, just because of pandemic stuff and not wanting to have a physical magazine for just people picking up on the stands or around campus or whatever. So the topic we decided on was Black Lives Matter. And then Grace and Haley, editor-in-chief and managing editor of the Daily Nebraskan, they came to me and were like, hey, we think you would be great to lead this project. And then it's important to have a Black person in part of the leadership for the project. So we started on that, started with stories and all that. But one thing we really wanted was to emphasize that this isn't just one special project and then we're done with it, right? Telling Black stories. We want to create like, this is supposed to set in motion something that'll last a long time, right? A precedent for it. And what Grace had told me is like, how do we want to make sure this lasts long past our times at the end? And creating a diversity inclusion board was something I like had in the back of my mind for a little while, but like then it just like clicked. I was like, yes, I want to create this board, right? Because students come and go every 4 years, and it's responsibility of all of us to care about diversity and inclusion, not just the board. But I think creating it would just put a structure in place that helps us stay consistent and make sure everyone is consistently working towards long-term change in diversity and inclusion year after year. So that's kind of how that came about. Hired members for the board that winter, and we had our first meeting like last month. We're going to have another one soon, and yeah.
I mean, to use your words really quick, sorry, Sausha, I just have to say, I really liked when I was reading your story your editorial piece that you said that you'd like to reiterate, this is not a semester thing. This is the start of a structural effort to make a long-term change for the better in the media landscape. And I really like that you said that, because I think sometimes it's really easy to get hung up in the like, what can we do right now, and not what can we do for the long term. So I really appreciated that. Now, Sausha, I totally just cut you off.
Oh, no, you're fine. I did. I was curious too, because I read through the first set of stories that came out. I wanted to know like more detail on how the Minority Student Athlete Collective came to be, how the diversity, I know you kind of just went over that, but the Diversity Inclusion Board and how that all came together so that you could be able to work on these stories.
Yeah, I think a lot happened last year. And it's
to put it lightly. Yeah.
Very wild to look back on. Last summer impacted me in a lot of ways, and there's only so much, you can really do as a journalist. But I wanted to use my voice. And to me, that means, putting passion into telling Black stories. And so when I got back on campus in the fall, one of the first things I covered was, hold on. When we talk about the Minority Student Athlete Collective, they first came about in like September, definitely August. They had put out a list of requests to the athletic department, which I kind of noticed didn't get like a whole lot of attention, or it did in the moment. Then it was kind of just people moved on, right? And that's the first time I saw the use of Minority Student Athlete Collective. And then that fall, that was in September, October, they held a rally outside Memorial Stadium. It had gotten pushed back a few times because of weather and things like that. So I went to cover that. And that was a really great experience for me. That was something I was really looking forward to. And, something that wasn't like necessarily directly led to the creation of the board and the project, but like definitely is a part of this story, was, when I was covering that event, I noticed that there was like very little other media there, which like really bothered me because, there was a lot going on with sports in the Big Ten, bringing football back. But something I thought was like really important, was this diversity stuff. Everyone else had expressed how important this stuff is. And then this rally comes, this like actual thing comes right in our area, and it's barely covered and all. And I did like a whole Twitter thread about that. And yeah.
Speaking of that Twitter thread, and I think that this was something that like, I'm glad that you shared that. I'm glad that you tweeted what you did. And when you talk about 2020, something that like, speaking just for myself personally, that starting with our yearbook, when we spoke very openly with Josh Mitchell about, hey, George Floyd was just killed and you're celebrating the life of this Black athlete on your cover, but you're very like, it just feels like you're ignoring everything else happening. And like, we had been planning the yearbook announcement for almost 6 weeks at that point. So it was more just like, that's when the announcement was coming. But I am glad that he called attention to it and said, hey, this is something that I'm experiencing, I'm seeing, and it's not, in my opinion, cool that like you're not seeing it too. And I do find myself now, because of you too, like but it's so hard because it shouldn't be your responsibility to teach me. You know what I mean? Like it shouldn't be on you to have to like say, hold up, Erin, you're not paying attention to this. But I will say, between like what happened with Josh Mitchell or when I saw your tweets, the one thing I do feel like it has done for me, at least personally, is it does make me take a step back and ask myself, am I missing something in a story? Am I not seeing something? Am I saying like, oh, something that might be important to me because like as a woman, I'm really vocal about women in sports. So where am I missing that elsewhere? But it is something where I know I read that you were like kind of didn't know if you should tweet that.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about that, because something that really stuck with me, and it has since I read it for the first time, by the way, is you saying like, maybe I missed it. Maybe it wasn't what I thought it was. So like I was excited for this event and I show up and no one else is there. So like, did I miss the newsworthiness of it? And that, I tell you, like that, like it even like pains me now that you felt that way.
Right.
So I guess walk me through that and why you thought for that moment this isn't something, and how you started to work yourself back toward no, this is something that needs attention and needs to be covered. Because I feel like, especially for a student, that had to be a very like kind of confusing thing to work through.
Yeah. Just like, first off, I'm generally like a very shy person. I'm not someone that can always just like be talking, and even on Twitter, like tweeting something, I'm like, should I even say this? I'm not generally a vocal person. So that was part of it. I was just really nervous. And the second part was like, when no one else is saying something, you're like, am I the only one that's seeing this? Right. Is it only driving me crazy? And I asked my friends, I asked my roommates, and I'm like, yeah, that's a problem. You should say something. And then I did. But it's almost like you're gaslighting yourself, and you're like, am I seeing this right? It's like, no, am I crazy? But then I was like, all right, you take a second, you're like, yes, I should talk about this, and it is an issue. There's no way that, and like, it almost makes you more upset because you're like, I just don't understand it all.
As I saw it, or just as I said as a student to work through, but excuse me for not being very clear here. Like, it's not just as like, for the record, student journalists are incredible. Like, people don't recognize what student journalists do around this country as far as moving journalism and media forward, because it is a very like, it is an old white boys club. Let's just be very, very honest about that. And it student journalists everywhere moving it forward. But I want to apologize because I just said it as like you were working through that just as a student, but no, you're also working through that as a Black man who's now having to basically determine, like you said, am I gaslighting myself? Am I being gaslit? Like, what am I like missing here? And it pains me that you felt that way. So first and foremost, I apologize for not more clearly stating that. But I mean, when you did get that story out, you were one of the only to have a story about that. What was that experience like afterward?
Yeah, I mean, I was really happy I was able to tell the story. I was upset that others didn't, but I'd rather have me tell it and have it out there. So that was one thing. I think that's it.
It was a good story. We used actually full transparency. Hale Varsity was, again, credit to the Daily Nebraskan and student journalists like Drake, because we were able to use a photo that you had of DeJuan Baker for a Q&A. And it's like, if that photo hadn't existed, thankfully you were kind enough to work with us to allow us to use it. But I mean, even then it's like, yeah, we could have had a photographer there. So it's such a hard it's such a hard thing in hindsight, but it's the thing where I think about that day. And if someone were to say, why wasn't someone there? I could have given you a number of reasons that feel a lot like excuses. A lot of it was we didn't have people in town. Some people were, we're a smaller staff. So some people were not in town. Some people were covering something else that evening. And there was some confusion about like what the date or when the date was, but it doesn't really matter to me in hindsight. All of it just kind of feels like a lot of excuses. But hopefully the next time that happens, we're more aware and better about it. And like I said, get somebody there to take the photo. Although that photo was fantastic. So I'm grateful for it.
I did want to touch on too, because like the initial write-up that I wrote goes into that story, but then leads people to some of the stories that have started to be compiled. How important is it, not only to you, but to the community at large, to have the opportunity to be able to tell the stories and cover the history of people of color in not only Lincoln, but in Nebraska, and how important it is for history going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. That's a big part of it. Is that another reason it was so important for me to cover this, and it was so like worrisome that no one else did, was like, these things can easily get lost if we aren't paying attention to them. And that's what we like, so much of what we saw when we did these stories on Black history is that so much of the story is incomplete because people didn't care and people weren't willing to tell the stories. So that's why it's really important to me to see like, we have this, this is recorded, this was important, because it wasn't always viewed that way. And it's important to try and dig up the stories that haven't been fully told and piece those together and just provide a more complete picture.
In the first block of stories that you released, there's 5 of them. Can you tell us a little bit? You don't have to tell us like a lot about each of them, but would you be willing to share a little bit about each of those? Because I have them pulled up. But I would just love to hear from your perspective what led to each of those 5 being selected for this particular grouping that have been released.
Yeah, I mean, we tried a bit more than that, and then some didn't work out. But one of them was just a basic timeline of the Black Lives Matter movement, just more informational, just so people can get a bigger picture of how these things have happened in Nebraska. One that I did was on the impact of Black fraternities to Nebraska football and just the legacy that exists there, because there's been a lot of Black football players who have been in Black fraternities, and that's helped them express themselves and things like that. And it's an important part of like Nebraska football history that isn't always talked about.
Because you see them on the field do it, actually.
Yeah. And one of my coworkers did a piece on when there was, for 39 years, there was no Black athletes here between Clinton Ross and Charles Bryant, no Black athletes that lettered in football because of a ban that existed in the conference at the time. And the story of, how Nebraska fell into that and kind of just let it happen had not previously been told before. And it was like, okay, this thing exists, but we're just going to ignore it. And there's so much like missing history there. Like there's just about 30 years of not even a mention of it. And then we also did a story on Black businesses, just the history of, the historical challenges of owning a Black business in Lincoln and what has come with that, the troubles that have come with that, the good things that have come with that. We did a story on Black musicians and the same type of thing, trying to make a way for yourself in Lincoln, the musical culture in Lincoln, and the challenges historically that has brought.
And I should say for anyone who's listening, if you're wondering how you can read these, we'll link them in like at hailvarsity.com. They'll be linked in the show notes for this show because they're really, really great. Drake, you all have done a fantastic job on telling these stories.
Thank you.
And I'm not just saying this because it was you, but I really, really did enjoy the story on the Divine Nine and talking about just the, like, it's something that I think if you weren't paying attention, or maybe people just don't realize what it is, but sometimes people see Darian Daniels when he would be on the sideline and they think he's dancing, but he's actually stepping.
Right.
And if you're somebody who isn't aware of what that is, your story was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. The illustrations were great too. Who did the GIF of that?
Yeah, that was Andrea, our art director, and that was really cool.
I need somebody to teach me how to be so creative, because it was really great. But the story, we'll make sure that we link everything, because like it's a really, really great series, and if people aren't spending time with it, they really should be. Do you have a plan for like how often you hope to release stories, or is it kind of just like you said, as they maybe get completed?
Yeah, so it's actually separated in like 3 parts. The first part was newsroom diversity. That was in October. It was the announcement of it, in that editorial, the announcement of the board. And then we had our newsroom diversity survey. And then the second one was all on Black history in Lincoln. And the third one we're in the process of working on, and we're planning on putting out like this month or so, is on the current Black experience in Lincoln. So that is what we're doing.
Is the diversity report new, or is that something that the Daily Nebraskan had done regularly prior till now?
Yeah, that was the first one we've ever done this fall.
Nice. It's fascinating to read through it.
Yeah.
That was something where I was like, I mean, just the transparency of it, you'd think that should have been there, but that's why I was like wondering, like, is this something that had existed in my case, like I just wasn't paying attention and just didn't notice it.
Right.
But I think, like you said, the transparency, which was a part of that editorial, which I found the link for it in, is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think in doing this, we have to be transparent of what we're doing ourselves. We can't just say, we care about this, we want to tell these stories, but we have to put that work in ourselves and make sure our newsroom is diverse so we can tell these stories fairly and accurately and provide chances for more journalists that look like me and everyone else.
I keep looking at you, Sausha, because I don't want to cut you off.
No.
That's the one thing, Drake, I will tell you, in the world of COVID podcasting, is you learn to like in person, you have like cues and things, and like Zoom, there's just nothing. Like, it's just like the wild, wild west of like, who's talking? Is it you? Is it me? Is it
raise your hand?
Some people like discovered the like raise your hand function on like Teams and have been like really into that. I have not been doing that. So I just am always awkwardly like, no, you go. It's your turn.
I really am looking forward to reading more of these stories. It's so well put together and so informative. And I think, like you said, it's just super important to go over that history and make a clear, timeline for it, because I don't think before this really that there has been as much as an effort as maybe there should have been to be able to tell these stories and the history of some of the things that we may not understand, which this helps give us a little more understanding on some of that history.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I mean, I have to say, Drake, good on you and I think so we've talked, and this is why I'm so glad that we have you as a guest on this episode, because we've talked a lot about the things that we're talking about today, but I feel like it's not always like, it is our place to help educate and our place to take some of that, that emotional labor on of like actually helping. Cause it's like, you can't do everything, but I have to give you a lot of credit, because the way that you explained like how you felt when you were tweeting what you did, I never, like, I honestly felt like you were far too gracious almost in how you responded, because you sounded just like, I mean, you are an absolute pro. You're just a pro at I commend you so much for working through this, but I guess I'm stumbling over this myself, because I appreciate really sincerely the fact that like you were willing to say something, because as a member of the media, as a member of somebody who's been doing this for 10 years, like, you're right. We are not diverse enough. We are not accurately representing those that we cover. And there should have been somebody from every single outlet at that event. And there should be things that are covered all the time that aren't. And some of that is limitation of, you know, I get it. Newsrooms are getting cut at an alarming rate, but that doesn't excuse, like I said, a lot of what I feel now is like, am I making excuses, or is it something that like legitimately, like I said, am I just making excuses not to cover it?
Right.
So when you think about someday when you graduate, what would you like to do? Like, what is the future for Drake look like?
Oh yeah, that's a tough question. It's a big one, but I think in the near future, I want to keep, you know, fighting for diversity and inclusion at the Daily Nebraskan, doing this work, and then just in my career, I want to continue telling these stories that matter. Continue to tell the stories of people that look like me, athletes that look like me, and, you know, everyone, even people that don't look like me. You know, just tell the stories that aren't being told quite enough, and make sure that they're told, and that these people have their voices heard that deserve to be heard.
And give out Drake's takes. I really appreciate that you call them Drake's takes.
Yeah.
Well, you like cross out the Drake.
That's a big thing. Well, not a big thing, but a running joke. My roommate started, really. So.
I mean, if you're gonna have a name that works that well with it, you got to just roll with it.
I feel like I'll cave eventually.
I appreciate though that you cross it out every single time, just like to make it very clear that like you're not 100% on board with this, but you're at least like going with it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, you know, so how you've been with the Daily Nebraskan since 2018, right?
Correct. Sorry. Yeah.
No, you don't apologize. I'm just making sure I have my information right. When you look over these last, like, gosh, what is it? Like now it's 2.5, you're going to be into your third year. What has this experience been like for you? Like, do you still want to be in journalism, right? Like we haven't completely like scared, like you haven't been scared off from it, because I want people to stick in journalism. Like I always say this, I'm like, please stop leaving. I feel like students always leave before they graduate. It's like journalism.
Right. Yeah, no, I want to stay in journalism. It's been a really interesting journey, because I barely applied for the DN. I was very nervous to apply for the DN.
Oh, really?
Just like to put myself out there, it's so hard sometimes. And I was like really shy, like really, really shy my freshman year. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to apply for assistant sports editor for my sophomore year. And then they talked to me and I wanted to do that. So I've been really lucky and blessed to be in the positions that I've been put in. And then, you know, I've just kind of taken it from there, done the best I can. And I'm really happy with how I've grown over the years and how I've been able to use my voice.
And like I said, people really need to follow you on Twitter. So it's at Drake Keeler. He's not like, when we talk about like, we're not here to just stick to sports on this podcast. Like he certainly doesn't just stick to sports. So like, you know what you're signing up for right now, but you always have really good, like, in the moment reactions to things that are happening. I usually like see you tweet something. I'm like, dang, that was good. So that is what you're getting from Drake, is he's beating me to the punch on all the jokes I wish I was like, I wish I had. So I really recommend your Twitter account.
Thank you.
All right. So what has life been like for you in pandemic? Like as a student, I just need to know, are you looking forward to the day where like it's post-pandemic world and like life can kind of go back to normal, or has it felt normal? I'm just curious, like what college has been like.
Yeah, it feels like we've been in this for so long. Like I barely remember what it's like not to be in a pandemic now, but It took some time to adjust, of course. Zoom classes are something else. I do look forward to, going back in person. Sometimes I don't like just going to class on campus and all that, but like I do enjoy interacting with people. And actually always paying attention in class. Sometimes it can be a little tempting to just leave the Zoom on and do other things, but I don't know. It's been generally good. I feel like I've been doing a good job. It can be overwhelming just balancing everything, of course, but it's generally been good.
I'm not asking you to call yourself out by any means, but I have seen some TikToks where students have said like they basically open their classes and like treat them like podcasts. So they're like in the background, like cleaning or doing other things, and they're just listening to their class. I'm like, that's actually like, if you're somebody who can task, like if you can do multiple things, like that's kind of genius.
Right.
Unless you can't multitask, and then it's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
So, like, don't call yourself out. I don't want your professors to, like, be listening to this and be like, wait, Drake's not listening.
They know I am.
So Drake is actually, this is pretty cool. So we asked him to be on our show. And then I found out, like, 2 days later that Derek asked him to also be on the Varsity Club podcast in the exact same week. We did not plan this. Like, we didn't... You would think working together, we would communicate more effectively, but we didn't. So he was like, hey, I heard that Drake's going to be on your podcast. So it's good, because if you have listened to this podcast and you're like, Drake seems really cool, which you should feel that way, I want to hear more from him. The Varsity Club podcast this week, which drops on Fridays, will feature none other than Mr. Drake Keeler himself. And I have a preview of what Derek is going to talk with him about, and it's going to be different than what he has talked about today. So it's something that you should definitely bookmark and get ready to listen to on Friday if you want to hear more from Drake, which if your answer is anything but yes, I do, then I don't know what you're doing. I just don't.
It'll be a good episode. This is a good episode. We should figure out a way to have Drake on, like, more frequently.
Yeah. Well, and I always say, like, Drake, like, the thing with this podcast is, like, I stumble over my thoughts all the time, because we do enough to prepare where we're like, we want to, like, we want to know what we're talking about. But, like, at the same time, I think, like, I'm almost like hearing myself sometimes for the first time as I'm working through my thoughts on something, or as I'm working through. So I appreciate you bearing with me and everyone listening as I work through things, because I do want to say, going back to that event really quick from last fall, I am so appreciative of you, and I want to be clear why, because I don't think people really understand that it's easy in journalism to fall into habits. It's really easy to show up and check a box. It's really easy to say, today I have to do X, Y, Z. My beat is to do this. My job is to do this. And I'm just going to do those things. And it shouldn't have to be sometimes so blatantly pointed out to people, but it is a sign of our privilege when I'm able to look at something and go, well, today my job is X, Y, Z. And I think about, like, well, should I also be thinking about this, or should I also be doing this? And I'm glad that you said what you did. And I am glad that you drew attention to it on Twitter. And I hope that you keep speaking up, but I understand when you say, like, you're shy, because I don't like to rock the boat. So I find myself often not saying things, mostly out of, like, self-preservation. But it's so hard because that doesn't benefit you if I don't say something too. So thank you for saying something, and thank you for speaking up. And hopefully we can continue to make this media more representative, and not just allow this to be a project you take on, but a project that we all can take on, because diversity is what we cover. We cover athletes that are very, very diverse. There's no reason that we shouldn't be just as diverse as them. So I don't think I did a good job conveying that originally, but I really do appreciate, and I hope everyone listening appreciates that Drake speaking up is not a call out on anyone else. If you're uncomfortable by being called out, that is something that you need to sit with and reflect on. That is not something that he needs to make you feel better about.
Yeah, thank you.
I will say, to tie this to really quick before we let you all go, if you're wanting more, if you're wanting another example of something that, like, did either of you watch the Golden Globes, by the way?
I did not.
Didn't. Nope.
Okay, so first and foremost, just to be clear, our Zoom production has been way better than their. For some reason, they really struggled with the live production. It was weird. But they really significantly called out the Hollywood Foreign Press because they don't have a single Black member of the Hollywood Foreign Press, and they have committed to making that happen. So 1 year from now, when the Golden Globes roll around again, let's hold them accountable to that, because here's the thing, it's not going to be held accountable unless people speak up. So it was interesting watching people say, well, that's all Tina Fey and Amy Poehler seem to be talking about. They need to, because you know who was hosting? Amy and Tina. If they're not speaking up about it, who is calling it to light? Who is calling action to this? So this is the same thing when it comes to media practices. We all have to be vocal about it. We have to show up. If we have the ability to hire, if you're in a position of power to hire, make sure you're not hiring this person that just looks like you. We have to do more. And Drake, you may feel like as a junior in college, the world is so out there in front of you right now, but you are leading it right now. Like, you are leading so much, and thank you for doing that. I really do mean that.
Thank you. I'm trying my best.
We can all certainly listen and do our part and learn, and keep sharing those amazing stories, because they're so great. They're so great.
I will.
We're going to link those in our show notes, like I said. And we'll also link to Drake. Please follow him. He's pretty phenomenal. Drake, any last words before we let you go?
I mean, not really. I'm thankful to be on here. I'm going to keep doing the work, telling these stories, and I just encourage everyone to listen and, push for diversity and all the same things. Yeah.
Well, I will continue to push for you to also have Drake steaks, but that's in addition to everything else. No, seriously, you are awesome. Thank you for everything. But seriously, follow Drake, support the DN. Student newspapers are seriously going to change the world. So that's our challenge for the week. Oh, Siri just decided to chime in. That's our challenge for the week. Read everything we share from the DN and support them. Follow Drake. That's a really good place to start. And we appreciate you being here, and we will talk to you next week.
A Hurrdat Media Production.